Hello, Namaskar, and Vanakkam. Today's topic is: should you be looking at a job in the booming startup sector, or are you better off looking for a job in the corporate sector or government or public sector? The reason I've taken up this topic is because every time I'm at a college, one of the common questions I'm asked by young people is that should I be looking at jobs in startups or in big companies? Before I answer this question, let me talk about a recent news item that many of us may have read about. We read in April that PepsiCo, the beverage company, has set up a modern new factory in Bihar. It's over 500 crores of investment, and because it's such a large investment and in Bihar, it made headlines. But as I looked at this further, I read other news reports which spoke about how this is such a modern factory with robots, etc., because of which not too many jobs are going to be created. Actually, this is what is happening the world over. Big companies are going in for automation and they're expanding, making a lot of investment, but they're not the ones creating jobs. Jobs are being created in the booming startup sector. But to come back to the question that a lot of students and young professionals ask me, that whether they should pursue a job in startups or not. I'm going to give you 3 reasons or factors to think about. Factor number 1 is the risk versus reward equation. Startups offer mega rewards, but they also come with risks. But let's start with the example of Infosys founder Dr. Narayan Murthy, his driver Kannan. Way back in 1999-2000, when Infosys got listed on Nasdaq, it made headline news that Kannan had become a millionaire, a rupee millionaire, not a dollar millionaire, but still a millionaire. Not just Kannan, Mr. Narayan Murthy's driver, but many other drivers, electricians, attendants, many junior employees all became millionaires. Suddenly, for the first time, we saw in India how hundreds, if not thousands of people in India could become wealthy if a company did well in the startup space. That was the first time that realization came upon all of us. More recently, in 2018, we saw headlines when Flipkart got acquired by Walmart. We saw headline news that said hundreds of Flipkart employees had become dollar millionaires. These were all early employees who were doing well, employees who were young, and they suddenly became dollar millionaires and very, very rich. What the Infosys story and the Flipkart story tell us that in the startup sector, there are opportunities for everyone to get big rewards and get rich. It's not limited to a few people at the top. By contrast, in large corporates, at the top of the pyramid, the CEO and senior management, they get big salaries, but you need 20, 30, 35 years to reach that level. That's when you make a lot of money, you get bonuses, you sometimes get shares also. But at the bottom of the pyramid, junior employees, less qualified employees don't get that money-making opportunity. So therefore, if you're a young person and willing to take the risk when you're young of working in a startup, by all means do so, because that's where you can earn real rewards. Yes, you should be prepared for the risk that many startups fail. But then, when you're young, you can afford to take those risks. Who knows, you will be one of those dollar millionaires sooner rather than later. So that's the factor number 1 to think about, the risk-reward equation. After this, we will move on to the other 2 factors. Let's talk about the second factor now, which is your mindset. Do you have the right mindset to work in a startup, or is your mindset more for a large corporate? Let me take the example of 2 people who worked in my company some years ago. One of them was a person called Lalit, another was a person called Arvind. Now, Lalit was a young, dynamic, ambitious person. He was my business development person in India, helping to build new business for my company. We were only operating in India at that point of time. Then, as a company, we said we should expand into Southeast Asia to offer the same services. So one day I casually asked Lalit, what if I make you in charge of international business outside India? Can you do it? Without any hesitation, he said, yes, certainly. Then I asked him, will you take a 2 crore revenue target for next year? Without batting an eyelid, he said yes. Now that was positive, confident attitude and mindset. Even though we did not know as a company, he did not know as an individual how that target would be met, whether how it would be very challenging or whether it's possible to do, but his spirit and attitude and mindset was perfect. He said, I will go out and do it. That is the mindset that is required to succeed in a startup, because a startup is always going into unknown territories, exploring new things. And the employees who do well are the ones who use a positive mindset and attitude to give it their best shot to help the company succeed and therefore grow their own careers. On the other hand, there was this person called Arvind, slightly older. We hired him from a multinational bank because he had certain expertise in database and analytics, and we did not have that expertise within the company. So we hired him, thinking that he would bring his experience and help us to put everything in order. But rather than focus on the work part of it, his mindset was focused on something completely different. Will I get a small office to work in? Will I get a big office to work in? Can I get a new computer? I don't want to work with a computer that is 1 year old. What perks will I get? So his entire mindset was focused on things that were important to him, but not the main focus of the business. And that is the problem when you look at large corporates. Employees are focused on climbing up the ladder, getting the perks, succeeding in the rat race, being one up on your colleague. And the mindset is very different than from working in a startup, where the mindset in a startup is, I can do it, I will do it, I want to do it. Whereas in a large corporate, the mindset is somewhat different. So as an individual, you need to think about whether your mindset is that of someone who just wants to go out and do things, or is your mindset about gradually moving up the corporate ladder, picking up that extra perquisite, slightly bigger office, being one up on your colleague, being ahead in the rat race. Depending on the mindset, you should decide whether you'd like to work in a startup or in a large company. Let's now talk about the third factor to think about to decide whether you'd like to work in a startup or a big company. And this third factor, I call it the learning curve. I don't know whether you learned swimming at a young age, but when I learned swimming, when I was a young kid, I remember the coach would take some of us and push us into the deep end of the pool. His logic was, when I throw you into the deep end of the pool, you will find a way to use your arms and start swimming, and then you learn because you've been thrown into the deep end of the pool. You learn very quickly when you're put in a difficult situation, and that is when the learning curve is very, very fast. To give you another example, in 2020, when I was leading a task force for making a very high-end ICU ventilator during COVID, we call it the ventilator project, we had 20 people in our task force. The youngest of them was a 23-year-old person called Tushar Agarwal, originally from Agra, then studied at IIT Kanpur. Now he's an engineer, remember. But when we decided to make a ventilator and we designated him as the main R&D person, overnight he worked so hard to read medical textbooks and learn everything about how a medical equipment like ventilator is made. And he was instrumental in creating a fantastic design for the ventilator that went on to get manufactured, and today there are over 4,000 of these ventilators in the market. Now, without Tushar's ability to quickly learn this new field or new area, this would not have been possible. So Tushar had the right ability to quickly ramp up his learning very, very quickly within weeks, not months, to learn something completely new. So this is what happens in startups. You get, as a young person, you get a chance to work on new projects completely out of your comfort zone. And because you're pushed into doing something so new, you learn so quickly on the job that at the end of it, when the work is completed, you feel on the top of the world that I have learned something new, I have learned something well, and now I am ready to move on to my next role in the company and learn something else. So learning curve, very, very rapid learning curve, is one of the big aspects of working in a startup. Now, for most of my career, I have been an entrepreneur in different companies, or I have been mentoring young startups. And I can tell you, every time I've mentored a new company or been part of an entrepreneurial journey, I have kept learning. There were just a few years, 4 years at the beginning of my career and 2 years in between when I was part of large multinationals in both cases. I can tell you, my learning was so slow and so limited during that period. So basically, what I'd like to say is that if you're the kind who wants to learn new things, learn quickly, and feel that sense of achievement, then working in a startup is the right place. Because learning in a corporate is slow, happens progressively. It happens when you're given a new role or a transfer after every 3 years. And therefore, it takes a full lifetime for you to learn. Whereas in a startup, you can learn when your mind is at its peak in your 20s or 30s. And that's the third factor I'd like to keep in mind. So as you can see, we've looked at 3 things or 3 factors which can help you decide whether a startup career is best suited for you or a large company. The first factor was the risk versus reward equation. The second factor was the mindset. And the third factor now is the learning curve. Based on all this, you can decide which is better suited for you. Well, if you decide that a startup career is the right one for you, the logical question that you will now ask is, so how should I go about looking for a startup job? What kind of startup jobs are there available in the market? So let's look at the first thing. Which are the hot startup sectors? There are some startup sectors that are hot and have been around for a while, like e-commerce. But in recent past, because of COVID, healthcare and the education sector have become very, very important, and they will continue to remain important in the years to come. The other new sectors which are now very promising or are called sunrise sectors. One is clean energy. Everywhere in the world, we're talking about climate change. There's a lot of investor money coming in, a lot of investor interest in clean energy, green tech. It's known by different names. Agriculture, use of technology in agriculture, or agri-tech as it is called, is another important area. This is an area where India needs to transform its agriculture, and therefore a lot of innovation is required, a lot of investment is required. So this will be another booming sector for the future. And the other sector I'd like to talk about is electronics. India is trying to become a global hub for both semiconductor manufacturing and electronic appliance or device manufacturing, because we don't want to have a massive import bill from China or other countries. We want to be a manufacturing hub. So that's going to be another boom area. Besides these regular boom areas, you can keep your eyes and ears open, because every year or two, there are new boom areas keep coming up. For example, a year ago, quick commerce was very, very big. But those are temporary fads that keep coming and going. Some of the sectors I mentioned are really promising for the next 5 or 10 years, which is when you hope to make your career. So your next question to me could be, okay, these are great sectors, so how do I prepare for them? Well, let's look at the different kinds of jobs that are available in these companies. If you're a techie, particularly a software person, you could be in the engineering function or the product function of a startup where your tech skills will be valued. If you're very good at understanding how consumers behave and what the user experience should be, then you could be in the product management function, because the product manager is the one who thinks about how consumers will engage with the product, use the product, and finds ways to constantly improve it. So engineering function, product management function. These are two options if you're a techie. If you're very good at numbers and Excel spreadsheets and data, then one of the big roles in a startup is known as business analyst and a data analyst. These are people who work with data to look at different trends, different parameters, different performance metrics, and so you could be a data analyst or a business analyst. If you're the kind who's very good at marketing, particularly digital media or social marketing, you will always be in demand in any startup, because after all, a startup has to acquire customers and engage with them. And the most common way to do that is by using digital marketing. So that's another big role. Besides this, if you're the kind who is very good at coordinating things, running around, doing operations, then operations is a big function in any startup. There are a lot of operational roles in any startup. And finally, if you're like an all-rounder and you're good at many of these things, there are two interesting roles in startups. One is you could be what is known as a program manager. You're given responsibility for a specific project that could be either in one domain like marketing or product, or it could cut across all of this to be cross-functional, and you could be given the responsibility for a new initiative, for example, or a new project. So project management or a program manager role is the other one to look at a startup. So there's a whole variety of roles in a startup. But what I would urge you is that get into a startup with any one of these roles that you think you're most suited for. But once you get into a startup, go in with an open mind. You can actually look at all the other roles that are there. If something else catches your fancy, you can raise your hand, pitch for that job. There is so much of variety that is possible in the experience that you can get in a startup, and that's what I would recommend. So today we have looked at 3 different factors based on which you can decide whether you want to pursue a startup job or a corporate job. The 3 factors we looked at. One was the reward versus risk equation. If you want rewards faster, even though there is a risk involved, then go the startup route. If you're the kind of person who does not want to take those risks, even if the rewards might be slightly less, then you can go the corporate route. The second factor we looked at was mindset. If you have the mindset of saying, I want to get things done, I'm a doer, I am action oriented, I want things to move fast, that mindset makes you better suited for startup. But if your mindset is to have slightly more peaceful existence where things move slowly, where you are happy to move progressively from one department to another department, get promotions gradually in your career, then a corporate career may be better for you in terms of mindset. The third factor we spoke about was the learning curve. How working in a startup is like being thrown into the deep end of the pool. You're given new and challenging assignments very frequently, and how quickly you learn to do those will make you very, very successful. But if you prefer to have a learning curve that happens over a 30-year period as you get transferred and promoted within a large corporate, that's of course a different path to take. So taking these 3 factors into account, you can decide for yourself which one are you better suited for. There is no right here, there is no wrong here. To each person, it is her own decision or his own decision. But remember, jobs are being created in both sectors, startups and corporates. But startups are where more jobs will be created in the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years, whereas corporates will be slightly slower in terms of number of jobs they offer. Remember also that India is now the third largest startup hub in the world after US and China. So you will see a lot of action in India. So no right or no wrong. It's for each person to take their own individual decision. But remember, these are two very different rides. If you want the excitement and the thrill of a Formula One race, then the startup path is for you. But if you're happy to go at the gentler pace of a metro train or a Mumbai local train, which will be predictable, which will go on time, then the large corporate journey is for you. Whatever path you choose, whatever decision you take, I'm sure you'll do a great job, and my best wishes are with you. Take a great decision, make a great move, have a great career.